I never thought I'd live with Troy Nichols. We'd spent 3 years making each other miserable at every community meeting, every neighborhood event, every chance encounter. Then my landlord sold the building, rent doubled citywide, and Troy offered me his spare room. I should have said no. I didn't. Like and subscribe for more real stories. Drop a comment sharing your most unexpected living situation. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday in March, taped to my door when I got home from work. Not a real eviction, technically. Just a cheerful letter informing all tenants that the building had been sold. Our leases wouldn't be renewed, and we had 60 days to find new places. I stood in the hallway of my Indianapolis apartment building, still holding my messenger bag, reading the same 3 paragraphs over and over. I'd lived in Fountain Square for 5 years. The neighborhood had changed dramatically in that time, transformed from overlooked and affordable to suddenly desirable. Art galleries replaced auto shops. Coffee roasters moved into old warehouses. Monthly First Friday events drew crowds from across the city. I'd watched it happen, participated in it even, attending meetings and serving on committees. I'd been part of the community council that advocated for small business protection and affordable housing preservation. And I'd spent most of that time arguing with Troy Nichols. Troy had moved to Fountain Square about 3 years ago and immediately involved himself in everything. He showed up at community meetings with opinions about parking, about development, about the new murals going up on Virginia Avenue. He challenged every point I made. If I suggested one approach to a problem, he'd propose the opposite. If I supported a local initiative, he'd find 3 reasons to question it. We'd become known as the 2 guys who couldn't agree on anything. He wasn't wrong all the time, which somehow made it worse. Troy worked as a legislative aide at the State House, which meant he understood policy and process. He knew how to read zoning codes and city budgets. He came prepared with facts and figures, but he delivered everything with this attitude, this certainty that his perspective was the only reasonable one. It drove me absolutely crazy. I drove him crazy too. I know I did. I'm a union organizer for service workers, and I approached neighborhood issues the same way I approached labor campaigns. I talked about solidarity and collective action. I pushed for solutions that centered the most vulnerable residents. Troy would roll his eyes, call my proposals idealistic, suggest I didn't understand economic realities. We'd go back and forth until someone else intervened or the meeting ended. People thought it was funny, mostly. The ongoing Troy and Zachary show. Some folks made jokes about us just needing to work out our tension in other ways. I ignored those comments. Troy was attractive in an objective sense, sure. Tall, athletic build, dark hair always slightly too long. These intense green eyes that looked right through you when he argued. But knowing someone is good-looking and actually liking them are completely different things. Now I was facing down an impossible rental market with 2 months to figure it out. I started searching that same evening. Within an hour, I understood how bad things had gotten. 1-bedroom apartments in Fountain Square were listing for nearly double what I currently paid. Even studios were out of reach. I expanded my search to surrounding neighborhoods, Bates Hendricks, Fletcher Place, even further out. Everything cost too much or had dozens of applications already submitted. I made spreadsheets. I calculated what I could afford if I cut every non-essential expense. The numbers didn't work. I made more spreadsheets with different variables. Those didn't work either. I lay awake that first night staring at my ceiling, trying not to panic. The next community council meeting happened 4 days after I got my notice. I almost didn't go. I wasn't in the mood to debate parking regulations or business district boundaries. But I'd never missed a meeting, and several people were counting on me to support a proposal about preserving affordable units in new developments. The irony wasn't lost on me. Troy was already there when I arrived at the community center on Shelby Street. He sat in his usual spot, 3rd row, aisle seat, reading something on his phone. He glanced up when I walked in, nodded briefly, then went back to his screen. Our standard interaction. The meeting covered the usual mix of updates and discussions. I presented the affordable housing proposal. Troy asked pointed questions about implementation and funding. I answered them. We didn't quite argue, but the old tension hummed between us anyway. When the formal agenda ended, people broke into smaller conversations. I was gathering my things when someone mentioned the building sales happening around the neighborhood. Several people had gotten similar notices. The conversation turned into an impromptu support session, everyone sharing their housing search frustrations and fears. I contributed my own story. Across the room, I noticed Troy listening. After the meeting, as people filtered out into the April evening, Troy approached me. This was unusual. We didn't seek each other out for casual conversation. "You're looking for a place?" he asked. "Yeah." "You know anyone with a lead on something affordable? I'm all ears." He hesitated, and I saw something almost uncomfortable cross his face. "I have a spare bedroom. I've been thinking about getting a roommate to offset my mortgage, if you're interested." I stared at him. This had to be a joke. "You're serious?" "Completely. It's a two-bedroom house in the Fletcher Place area, walking distance to everything here. The room's furnished if you need it, or you can bring your own stuff. Shared kitchen and living space. I'd charge you $800 a month, including utilities." That was less than half what I was currently paying, and significantly less than anything I'd found in my searches. It was an incredible deal. It was also Troy Nichols. "Why would you want to live with me?" I asked bluntly. "We can barely get through a 2-hour meeting without disagreeing about something." "We disagree about policy approaches," Troy said. "That's not the same as personal incompatibility. And honestly, I'd rather rent to someone I know through the community than a random stranger. At least I know you're stable and committed to the neighborhood." It was possibly the nicest thing he'd ever said about me. I didn't know how to respond. My mind raced through the implications. Living with Troy, seeing him every day, sharing a kitchen, a bathroom, all the small intimacies of cohabitation. It sounded like a nightmare. It also sounded like my only realistic option. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Sure, but don't wait too long. If you're not interested, I'll list it." He gave me his number. I gave him mine. We'd never exchanged personal contact information before, I realized. 3 years of regular interaction, and we'd only ever talked at public meetings or community events. I thought about it for 3 days. I looked at more apartments I couldn't afford. I ran more numbers that didn't work. I called my best friend in Louisville and talked through the whole situation. She laughed for a solid minute when I explained who Troy was, then turned serious. "Zach, you need a place to live," she said. "And this guy, annoying as he might be, is offering you a good deal in a neighborhood you love. Sometimes we have to make practical choices." I knew she was right. I still agonized over it for another day. Then I texted Troy and asked if I could see the place. He responded within minutes with his address and suggested that evening. I met him there at 7. The house was a small, renovated bungalow on Pleasant Street, cream-colored with black shutters and a neat front garden. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined, exactly the kind of place I'd want to live if I could afford it. Troy gave me a tour. The house was clean and thoughtfully decorated, which surprised me for no reason I could articulate. The spare bedroom was a decent size with good light from a large window. The bathroom was updated and well-maintained. The kitchen had obviously been remodeled recently, all new appliances and countertops. Everything felt adult and put together in a way that made my current apartment seem shabby by comparison. "You own this?" I asked as we stood in the living room. "Bought it 2 years ago." I got lucky with timing right before prices jumped. He gestured around. "It's more space than I need alone, honestly. Having a roommate makes sense." I wanted to find something wrong with it. Some reason to say no and avoid this entire complicated situation. But the house was great, the location was perfect, and the rent was manageable. "I'm clean, I'm quiet, and I pay on time," I said. "I work irregular hours sometimes, depending on what's happening with campaigns. I don't really have people over much. No pets. I can provide references if you want them." "Same on most of that," Troy said. "Except my hours are pretty regular and I do have people over occasionally. Nothing wild, just dinners or game nights. I'd expect us to communicate about shared spaces and be respectful of each other's schedules." "That sounds reasonable." We looked at each other. The air felt strange, weighted with the significance of this decision. "So," Troy asked, "you want to do this?" Every logical part of my brain said yes. One stubborn, emotional part resisted. I ignored it. "Yeah," I said, "let's do this." We shook hands. His grip was firm and warm. He smiled, and I noticed for the first time that it reached his eyes, made him look younger and less intense. I moved in 3 weeks later on a Saturday in May. Troy helped carry boxes, which I hadn't expected. We worked mostly in silence, efficient and focused. My furniture fit well in the bedroom. My books lined the built-in shelves. My clothes filled the closet. By evening, I was unpacked and officially living with my former nemesis. The first week was awkward. We were polite to the point of absurdity, overly careful about everything. Troy asked if it was okay to use the kitchen. I apologized for showering at 7 in the morning. We tiptoed around each other like strangers, which I supposed we were in most ways that mattered. The second week, we relaxed slightly. We established routines. Troy made coffee first thing every morning and started leaving enough for 2 pots. I cleaned the kitchen after dinner and began wiping down surfaces I knew he'd use for breakfast. Small considerations that made sharing space easier. We still didn't talk much beyond logistics and pleasantries. The third week, something shifted. I came home late on a Wednesday after a long day trying to negotiate with a restaurant owner who'd been shorting his workers' hours. I was frustrated and tired and not paying attention as I walked into the kitchen. Troy was there, cooking something that smelled incredible. "Rough day?" he asked, glancing at my expression. "Is it that obvious? You have a tell, you do this thing with your jaw when you're frustrated." He demonstrated, and I realized he was right. "There's extra if you want some. Just pasta primavera, nothing fancy." I should have said I was fine and retreated to my room. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and let him serve me a plate. The food was excellent, perfectly seasoned vegetables over fresh pasta. We ate together, and I found myself telling him about my day. He listened without interrupting, asked relevant questions, offered perspective from his experience dealing with difficult legislators. It was the first real conversation we'd had outside of policy debates. Troy was different in this context, less combative, more thoughtful. He talked about his own challenging day navigating political egos at the State House. I recognized some of the same frustrations I felt in my work. We had more in common than I'd realized. After that, we started cooking together sometimes. Not every night, but a few times a week. We'd coordinate schedules, plan meals, share the work of preparation and cleanup. Troy was an excellent cook with strong opinions about technique. I was more casual and improvisational. We developed a rhythm that incorporated both approaches. We talked during those dinners, real conversations about work and life and everything else. I learned that Troy had grown up in Fort Wayne, studied public policy at Indiana University, moved to Indianapolis specifically for his job. He'd gotten involved in community organizing because he genuinely cared about making neighborhoods work better, not because he enjoyed arguing with me specifically. That had just been an unfortunate side effect. "I always thought you saw me as an obstacle," I admitted one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "You were just trying to shut down everything I suggested." "I saw you as someone who didn't consider practical constraints," Troy said. He dried a plate carefully before continuing. "Your ideas were often good in theory, but you'd propose things without thinking about funding mechanisms or regulatory frameworks. It frustrated me because I could see the value in what you wanted, but also all the reasons it wouldn't work the way you imagined." "That's actually helpful feedback," I said. "You could have just said that instead of cross-examining me in public meetings. You could have asked questions instead of treating my concerns like attacks." He smiled slightly. We were both being defensive. I thought about that. He was right. I'd approached every interaction with Troy expecting opposition, which meant I'd heard everything he said through that filter. I'd never considered that his questions might be attempts to strengthen proposals rather than tear them down. We started attending community meetings together after that conversation. We'd walk over from the house, discuss agenda items on the way, coordinate our contributions. People noticed. Someone made a joke about us finally getting along. Another person asked if we were dating. "Roommates," Troy said quickly. "Just roommates." I echoed the same thing, but I felt something strange when I said it, something I couldn't quite name. Living with Troy, I noticed things I'd never seen before. How he always woke up early to run before work, coming back flushed and energized. How he hummed while cooking, usually old country songs I vaguely recognized. How he read voraciously, burning through novels and nonfiction in equal measure, always with a pencil nearby to mark passages. How he laughed at stupid internet videos late at night, this completely unself-conscious sound of delight. I noticed physical things, too. The way his hair fell across his forehead when he leaned over a book. The precise movements of his hands when he chopped vegetables. The line of his shoulders in the dress shirts he wore to work. The casual intimacy of seeing him in sweatpants and old t-shirts on weekend mornings. I'd thought he was attractive before in that abstract way you acknowledge objective facts. Now it felt different. Immediate, personal. I found myself aware of his presence in the house, tracking his movements even when we were in different rooms. I looked forward to evenings when we'd both be home. I felt disappointed on nights when he had plans with other people. This was problematic. This was my roommate, my former adversary, someone I'd only recently started to actually like as a person. I couldn't develop feelings for him. That would complicate everything. I tried to create distance. I worked longer hours, took on extra organizing shifts, found reasons to be out of the house. Troy noticed. "You okay?" he asked one morning in early July. "You've been scarce lately." "Just busy with work," I said, not technically a lie. "Right." He didn't sound convinced. "Well, let me know if you need anything." I almost told him then. Almost admitted that I was avoiding him because I'd started having feelings I couldn't afford to have. Instead, I nodded and left for a meeting I'd scheduled specifically to avoid lingering over breakfast. The strategy failed because absence just made everything more intense. I'd come home to find Troy cooking dinner and feel my heart rate increase. He'd laugh at something on TV, and I'd feel it in my chest. We'd accidentally brush hands reaching for the same thing, and I'd lose track of whatever I'd been saying. I thought I was hiding it well. Then a Saturday in late July happened, humid and sweltering, the kind of Midwest summer heat that makes you regret every life choice that brought you to this climate. The air conditioning in the house was struggling. Troy suggested we escape to the cultural trail and find somewhere with better cooling. We walked the length of the trail from Fletcher Place up through the city, stopping at a coffee shop in the Mass Ave area. We claimed a table by the window and ordered iced drinks. Troy had brought a book but didn't open it. Instead, we talked, one of those rambling conversations that covered everything and nothing. At some point, discussing a proposed development project near Fountain Square, our disagreement about approach surfaced again. But this time it felt different. We were actually listening to each other, building on ideas rather than just countering them. Troy made a point about zoning regulations. I suggested a community benefit agreement structure. He refined it with specific policy language. I added considerations about enforcement. We were collaborating, creating something better together than either of us would have alone. I felt the exact moment I realized I didn't just have feelings for Troy. I was falling in love with him. It must have shown on my face because Troy stopped mid-sentence. "What?" he asked. "Nothing." "Keep going." "Zachary." He said my full name, which he rarely did. "What's wrong?" "Everything." "Nothing." I couldn't tell him. I definitely couldn't tell him in a crowded coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon. "I just realized we're actually working well together," I said. "It's weird, good weird, just different." He smiled. "There it is, I like it." The way he looked at me when he said it made my pulse race. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Something that might have been just friendliness but might have been more. We walked home through streets shimmering with heat. Neither of us talked much. The silence felt charged with things unsaid. Back at the house, Troy went to take a shower. I retreated to my room and sat on my bed, trying to process everything. I'd moved in here out of necessity, expecting temporary coexistence with someone I didn't particularly like. Instead, I'd found someone I enjoyed spending time with. Someone who challenged me and complimented me. Someone I was falling for despite every logical reason not to. I couldn't act on it. The risk was too high. If I said something and he didn't feel the same way, I'd have to move out. I'd lose this house I'd come to love and quite possibly the friendship we'd developed. If I said something and he did feel the same way but it didn't work out romantically, same result. Either way, speaking up meant potentially losing everything. So I decided to stay quiet, keep my feelings private, appreciate what we had without asking for more. That resolution lasted about 2 weeks. We were cooking dinner together on a Thursday evening in early August. Troy was managing something complicated on the stove while I prepped a salad. We moved around each other easily, that familiar choreography we developed over months of shared meals. Music played from Troy's phone, some indie folk playlist he favored. A song came on that I loved. I mentioned it without thinking. Troy looked up, surprised. "This artist?" "Yeah, I've seen them live twice, once in Louisville, once at the Vogue here." "I was at that Vogue show," Troy said. "Last October, right?" We'd been at the same concert. We'd been in the same room, probably standing relatively near each other, months before I moved in. If someone had told me that night that I'd eventually live with Troy Nichols, I would have laughed at the absurdity. "Small city," I said. "Or we have more overlap than we realized." Troy turned down the heat on his pan and looked at me directly. "Can I ask you something?" My heart jumped. "Sure. Have I done something to upset you?" "The last few weeks you've seemed distant. If I've overstepped boundaries or made you uncomfortable somehow, I want to know so I can fix it." He thought he'd done something wrong. He was worried about my comfort, about our living situation. The consideration in his question, the genuine concern in his voice, completely undid my careful resolve. "You haven't done anything wrong," I said. "It's not you, it's me dealing with something. Anything I can help with?" This was my opportunity to deflect, to make something up or change the subject. I should have taken it. Instead, I heard myself say, "I don't think so, not unless you have advice on how to stop having feelings for your roommate." The words hung in the air between us. Troy went very still. "Feelings," he repeated carefully. I'd said it, I couldn't unsay it now, might as well commit. "Yeah, feelings. The inconvenient romantic kind." I set down the knife I'd been using and met his eyes. "I wasn't planning to tell you, I know it complicates things. But you asked directly, and I'm apparently terrible at lying to you." Troy turned off the stove completely. He moved the pan to a cool burner. Then he crossed the small kitchen until he was standing directly in front of me. "How long?" he asked quietly. "I don't know exactly. Gradually, then suddenly." "The past month or two, I guess." "The past month or two," he echoed, "while you've been avoiding me. I wasn't trying to be obvious about it." "Zachary," he said my name like it meant something. "I've had feelings for you since June." I stared at him. "What? Since June, maybe earlier. There was this night when you came home frustrated about a campaign meeting, and I made you dinner and we just talked for hours. I realized I didn't want you to leave, not just the kitchen. I didn't want you to ever leave." He reached out slowly, giving me time to move away, and touched my face. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you without making things weird." "Things are definitely weird now," I managed. "Yeah," he smiled. "Is that okay?" I answered by kissing him. Kissing Troy felt like the most natural and most extraordinary thing I'd ever done. He kissed me back with an intensity that suggested he'd been thinking about this as long as I had. We stood in the kitchen with dinner half finished and music still playing, learning the taste and feel of each other. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Troy rested his forehead against mine. "So that's a yes to weird being okay?" he asked. "That's a yes." We finished making dinner. We ate it sitting close together on the couch instead of at the table. We talked about everything we'd both been feeling and thinking and trying to hide. Troy admitted he'd been avoiding having people over because he didn't want to share my attention. I confessed that I'd been taking longer routes home from work to give myself time to compose my expression before seeing him. We'd both been ridiculous. We'd both been careful. And now we didn't have to be either of those things anymore. That first night, we stayed up late just being close, talking and kissing and existing together in this new dynamic. Troy told me about the first time he'd reconsidered his opinion of me, early on after I moved in, when he'd overheard me on the phone with a worker who'd been shorted on wages. He'd heard the patience and care in how I explained her options, the genuine anger on her behalf, the commitment to helping her fight back. "You were so different than how I'd imagined you," he said. "I'd built up this idea of you as impractical and overly idealistic. Then I heard you being strategic and thoughtful and completely focused on this person's real needs. It didn't match my assumptions at all." I told him about watching him cook that first time he'd offered me dinner, how I'd seen the care he put into something as simple as a weeknight meal, the attention to detail and desire to create something good. It had cracked open my certainty that he was just a rigid policy wonk who cared more about being right than about people. "We really didn't know each other at all," I said. "We know each other now." Troy laced his fingers through mine. "Better than I think I've known most people." He was right. Living together had forced an intimacy of daily life that you don't get any other way. We'd seen each other tired and frustrated and sick and happy. We'd navigated household problems and shared responsibilities. We'd built something solid without even realizing we were doing it. Dating while living together was disorienting in the best way. We didn't have to plan elaborate outings or coordinate schedules for time together. We were already together. Instead, we got to transform ordinary moments into something more. Cooking dinner became an opportunity to steal kisses between stirring and chopping. Movie nights on the couch meant curling up against each other. Morning coffee involved sleepy conversations while sitting close enough to touch. We went on actual dates, too. Troy took me to a new restaurant in the Garfield Park neighborhood, this tiny place with incredible food and terrible parking. I got us tickets to a show at the Murat, something I knew he'd been wanting to see. We explored parts of Indianapolis neither of us knew well, treating our own city like tourists discovering it for the first time. The physical relationship developed naturally. We were both careful, both checking in constantly to make sure we were moving at a pace that felt right. The first time we slept together, a few weeks after that initial kitchen kiss, felt like both a completely new experience and a continuation of everything we'd already built. The intimacy and trust we'd developed translated into physical connection that was intense and tender and absolutely right. We told people gradually. My best friend in Louisville first, via an only slightly panicked phone call where I explained the whole situation, and she laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. You moved in with your enemy and fell in love with him, she gasped out between laughs. This is the most on-brand thing you've ever done. I'm glad my life entertains you. Zach, I'm happy for you. Genuinely, you sound different when you talk about him. Lighter, I told my parents next, during our regular Sunday call. They were cautiously supportive, mostly just relieved I'd found a living situation that worked and wasn't financially stressed anymore. The relationship aspect they'd adjust to. They always did. Troy told his family too. His parents were apparently more immediately enthusiastic, which surprised him. His mother asked when they could meet me. His father wanted to know if this meant Troy would stop complaining about community meeting disagreements. At the next community council gathering in September, we arrived together as we had been for months. But something must have been different in how we interacted, some new ease or familiarity, because several people picked up on it immediately. So are you two finally together? Someone asked bluntly during the social period after the formal meeting. Troy looked at me. I looked at him. We'd agreed we wouldn't hide it, but also wouldn't make a big announcement. Troy said simply, "We are." The response was overwhelmingly positive. A few people claimed they'd known all along. Someone said they'd been betting on when we'd figure it out. Another person pointed out that our collaboration on neighborhood issues had gotten significantly more effective lately, and now they understood why. We settled into a relationship that felt both brand new and comfortably established. We were still ourselves, still had disagreements and different approaches to problems, but now we'd learned to channel that into productive collaboration instead of pointless opposition. Troy helped me think through organizing campaigns with a strategic policy lens. I helped him consider the human impact of legislative proposals he worked on. We made each other better at our respective jobs, challenged each other to think more broadly and carefully. At home, we developed our own routines and rituals. Saturday morning farmers market trips, Sunday evening meal prep for the week, random weeknight walks around the neighborhood, Troy reading on the couch with his feet in my lap, me working on campaign materials at the kitchen table while he cooked dinner. One evening in late October, almost 6 months after I'd moved in, we sat on the front porch watching the neighborhood transition into autumn. The trees lining Pleasant Street had turned brilliant colors. The air had that perfect, crisp quality that made you want to be outside. "I'm glad you said yes," Troy said quietly. "When I offered the room, I'm glad you took the chance." Me too, even though it seemed like a terrible idea at the time. The best things usually do. He reached over and took my hand. "I've been thinking about something. Should I be worried?" "No, nothing bad. I've just been thinking about the lease situation. Your original plan was month to month, right?" "No fixed end date?" "Right. Why?" "I want to take your name off the rental agreement and add you to the deed instead." He said it casually, but I could hear the importance underneath. "As a co-owner, equal partners." I turned to look at him fully. "Troy, that's a huge commitment." "I know, that's why I'm suggesting it." He met my eyes steadily. "I love you. I want to build a life with you. This house stopped being just mine months ago. It's ours. I want that to be official." My heart felt too large for my chest. "I love you too, and yes." "Absolutely yes." We worked out the details over the following weeks with a real estate attorney and financial planner. The process was complicated but manageable. By early December, the paperwork was finalized. The house on Pleasant Street belonged to both of us equally. We celebrated quietly, just the two of us, and a nice dinner at home. Troy made something elaborate and delicious. I contributed wine and dessert from a bakery we both loved. We ate slowly, talking about future plans, maybe eventually getting a dog. Possibly updating the back garden in spring. Someday, if things continued going well, maybe even getting married. It felt impossibly lucky. I'd moved in here expecting temporary accommodation with someone I barely tolerated. Instead, I'd found home in every sense that mattered. A physical place I loved, a partnership that challenged and supported me, a person who'd become the center of my world. After dinner, we bundled up and walked through the neighborhood. December in Indianapolis was cold and clear, stars visible above the streetlights. We followed familiar routes, past houses we'd walked by dozens of times, through streets we both knew by heart. Do you ever think about how different things would be if your landlord hadn't sold that building? Troy asked as we walked. Sometimes. I'd probably still be in Fountain Square, still barely affording rent, still arguing with you at meetings. Still miserable and not knowing why, Troy added. He pulled me closer as we walked. I used to think you were my opposite, everything I wasn't and didn't understand. Turns out you're my complement, the piece I didn't know I was missing. That's really sappy, I said. You love it, I did. I loved it and him and the completely unexpected life we'd built together. Sometimes the best things happen when your plans fall apart. When you take a chance on something that seems impossible. When you let someone surprise you. We'd spent years as adversaries, convinced we understood exactly who the other person was. We'd both been wrong. Getting to know Troy for real, seeing past assumptions and defensive reactions to the actual person underneath, had been the greatest gift of my life. The house came into view as we rounded the corner onto Pleasant Street. Lights glowed warm in the windows. Our home, our shared life, our future. Thank you, I said to Troy as we climbed the porch steps. For what? For offering me the room, for taking a chance on your enemy. He smiled and kissed me there on the porch, unhurried and sweet. Best decision I ever made. We went inside together, into the warmth and light, into the home we'd created. Behind us, the neighborhood settled into evening. Ahead of us, years of possibility stretched out like an open road. We'd travel it together, partners in every way, building something neither of us could have imagined alone. I'd moved in to save money. I'd stayed because I'd fallen in love. And I'd found something more valuable than I'd ever thought to look for. A person who saw me completely and loved me anyway. A person who challenged me to be better and accepted me exactly as I was. A person who'd started as my enemy